everyone, and welcome to episode 61 of the ITSM crowd. Today we are joined by three guests from Kinetic IT, who are the company who sponsored this year's Global SIAM survey. So the Global SIAM survey is run by Scopism. It's in its second year, and it's a review of the kind of the global state of SIAM. So who's doing it, why, what challenges they're experiencing, all that kind of thing. And we're really, really pleased to have Kinetic here today with us to discuss the findings. So my name's Claire Agata. I'm going to be the host for today's session. And the first thing I'm going to do is ask our panel to introduce themselves. So Adam, if we can start with you, please.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Claire. Hi, my name is Adam Martin. I'm from Kinetic IT and the New South Wales Regional Director. So that's my role.
Thank you very much. And Michelle.
Hi everybody, my name is Michelle Major-Goldsmith, obviously also from Kinetic IT. I'm a service management consultant. I've been working with Claire for the past few years on various initiatives, SIAM being one of them, Verizon being another, so heavily invested in sort of service management generally, and looking forward to having a conversation about the paper today.
Fantastic, thank you. And Steve, I've got my fingers crossed.
This is where I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Oh, wonderful.
The miracles of technology. So yeah, I'm Steve Robinson. I am Kinetic IT's principal consultant for service integration. And I've had the pleasure of working in service integration since around 2007. So lots of experience over that time, sort of developing the solutions and transitioning in various new customers.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And we are streaming live onto YouTube for this session. So if you're watching this live and you've got any questions that you'd like to put to the panel, if you just put them in the YouTube comments, we'll see them pop up here, and we'll be able to answer those actually during the session. We were meant to be streaming live on LinkedIn as well, but it doesn't look like it's working, so apologies if you were trying to watch us there. So the first question, I guess, is one that I'm going to ask to you, please, Adam, is why did Kinetic decide to sponsor the SIAM survey?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think for us, it's more about the education and the knowledge that we want to share about SIAM. We do come across a lot of organisations at the moment that are talking about an improved service experience for their customers or their employees, and we're finding that the general material out there for people to understand what SIAM is all about and the real value that it brings is really inconsistent and really has an opportunity to improve. So we find things like this, the Scopism global paper and the survey is really valuable for us because it's a reference point that we can help people educate and share knowledge, and it really anchors our stories of success around that. So that's one of the primary reasons why we're so excited to participate in this.
I think that's absolutely right. It's really nice to get a kind of a global picture, and I think for a lot of people when we're involved in things like a transformation to a SIAM model, you can feel like you're on your own. So it's really nice to see that maybe other organisations around the world are having similar challenges, or they're doing things for the same reason. I should mention as well, this is the website where you can get a copy of the white paper. It's a free download. We have hard copies as well, but you can go to Scopism and grab a copy and just kind of have a look at the sort of the challenges, the benefits that people were experiencing. One of the questions in the survey talks about the key drivers for SIAM. Were you surprised at any of the answers that came up in there?
Yeah, look, so for me, I am very surprised by some of those key drivers. It's really demonstrating that the supplier base is being asked to become a best of breed supplier model, and I'm finding that the more conversations I have with our customers, they're really driving this outcome driven, this business benefit conversation, and for me, it's really fascinating that the top 20% of some of these results, or the 20% marker for these results, effectively focuses around the support organizations of the IT services. And I think that that's really coming through in this best of breed practice. People want transparency and they want trust around the results that the service or the service partner community or the suppliers are really driving in to their organisation. And I think the retained SIAM capability or the strategic level of the SIAM capability is really, at the moment, really backward facing in regards to the support organisations that's providing that strong foundation. And they're really focused on the trust and the transparency and building a relationship that then should, I'm hoping, should accelerate their vision to be more forward facing, more facing towards their business stakeholders, unlocking value at speed, being able to co-create value through understanding that they have a complex organisation or they're trying to build something that's important and trying to unlock that capability. Most of the organisations that we're talking to at the moment, they're realising along this journey that what they're truly after, or what they're truly going to get, is they're going to get an organisation or a capability that's focused on an improved customer experience or a modern service-orientated, focused culture of wanting to improve and drive better services or better results. And I think what the end outcome should show in more time will be that organisations will start truly unlocking value through having business outcome aligned conversations or measures that reflect more of a business delivery function or a business value function, as opposed to it being, those service levels or those metrics that traditionally been what has been the steadfast of service management traditionally. So I think that's probably my biggest point of curiosity for the results so far, is that it's a very moving towards a best of breed supplier landscape and really accessing more transparency and more trust across that supplier landscape.
Yeah, it's an interesting one as well, because if you look at the results from the previous year, a lot of the rationale, strategic drivers was very much about, moving to different technologies like cloud services. And this year, there seems to be a shift on that, as you say, Adam, moving towards, the business drivers are the customer outcomes more than anything else. So, there's still a recognition of the complexity associated with having multiple providers. But, the previous year, it was all about, we want to go to different technology solutions and SIAM is going to help us to do that. And it was less of that this year. It was more about, we really want to develop better customer outcomes, as you've just been saying.
Completely.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that surprised me in the survey results this year was we asked a question about whether people were applying SIAM to IT services, to a mixture of IT and non-IT services, or only IT services. And what we're seeing is that SIAM is still in the main applied to IT services, maybe with a little bit of kind of a combination. But kind of thinking about it from a business value perspective, it surprises me, particularly as technology becomes more embedded in business processes. It surprises me that that SIAM isn't kind of embedded across the business. I don't know what you thought about that.
I'll probably take that one. I think because of its where it came from, and that recognition, I think, where service management's traditionally sat within an organization, within IT, to break out of that is really tricky. Even in organizations I've worked with, their HR systems are actually run out of HR rather than actually in IT, and the same with finance systems, they're run out of finance. So I think breaking out from a base where you're seen and recognized as an IT service management function, we have to turn that around. The original intent of service integration wasn't, let's put it this way, SIAM wasn't actually the actual solution. SIAM was the end result of a big activity that was completed. It started, you had to do a big restructure of your organization. You had to sort of look at procurement, your engagement with enterprise architecture, everything else. SIAM was what was left behind to make sure it continued to run. Now, that legacy, we're kind of left with that. We have to engage differently in the organization. We have to change our language and start talking differently, and removing the IT part of it. You could run this. You could run a hotel with this. You could run a hospital with this, and I know that the organisations do. So, I think that's probably one of the challenges we've got.
Yeah.
I
And
think
Steve,
we
it's
can.
like, oh, sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
I was just going to say, I think as well, we're talking more and more about enterprise everything. So, we've been last few years has been enterprise service management. So it would make sense that there would be enterprise SIAM because it's best practice, and we've all got service providers. So it does absolutely perfectly translate. But, I think as Steve is saying, it's probably come from a legacy position whereby people assume it's an IT thing, and it will take a bit of time to develop it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If I may, I think so. For me, I think the model of SIAM or the framework of SIAM will take time to get that education piece and that maturity piece, and it will take time for people to recognise the true value that the SIAM model brings. But what I think will happen is that the people that are exercising a SIAM framework, their style, their language, their thought process, these human-centered design people, these people that are thinking about complex problems, simplifying them, and building a solution that's customer-centric. I think they're the people that are going to shine, and they're going to step out in front of the SIAM model and be the pillar of where they will be asked for. It's the capability that will be asked for, and people won't necessarily attribute that to the SIAM model, that SIAM framework, or the balance that comes from having a mature SIAM operating model at play across a multi-sourced environment. So I think that's probably where we're going to see that transition of the people driving the model forward as opposed to the model driving the model forward. That's my view anyway.
Yeah, and I always have that question in my head as well, are people doing SIAM but just not calling it SIAM? Because I think that's always a possibility, is that people have this focus on collaboration, innovation across the supply chain. They just maybe don't put this complicated name on it like we love to do in the IT department. But in terms of the skills that are required for success working in a SIAM model, IT service management came up as the top skill. Do you think that is a fair reflection of the sort of skills that are needed for SIAM to be successful?
Well, I think what we've got is I think there's a little bit of a confusion. So service integration uses a framework like ITIL. It could be IT for IT. It could be any of the service management frameworks that are kind of out there. But it's the outcome that's really important. So I think the question and the response we've had are quite telling in regards to where the SIAM's moved to, and it's kind of moved more into that service management space. I think service management people understand and comprehend the benefits from it. I'd like to see it move away a little bit from the legacy of being based on ITIL, and for it to become its own independent thing that can then utilize these frameworks as the tools that they're meant to be, rather than being the solution. It's an enabler. So ITIL is an enabler of SIAM. But at the moment, people were seeing, and they're growing from service management into SIAM. So it's a logical expectation. I'd like to see recognition that these skills to enable a true SIAM organization, as Adam was referring to, are people who are able to do the human-centric design. People are able to build relationships and get stuff done. Recognizing the boundaries that might be in a commercial agreement, but trying to move away from that and enabling the business outcomes.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one as well, because when you think, Claire, back many years ago, as it is now, when we started to write the SIAM bodies of knowledge, it was a purposeful decision not to include service management processes in the main body.
Yeah.
Because it was a message to say, Steve said you will use some kind of service management framework to help you to do process activities, but that's not SIAM. And I think we still get this feeling when you talk to people that, this view that SIAM's end-to-end service management, and that's an element, but it's not the whole picture. And I think that, as an implementer, that's one of the things that's quite challenging to put across to people in terms of the additional benefits it brings, and therefore the different skill sets that are required. Things like organizational change management, experience of governance, contract management, Steve said, sort of supplier and relationship management, business analysis skills. They're the things that we need to bring to the fore, not the service management ones necessarily.
Do you think that maybe we're seeing this because a lot of this maybe falls onto service management people to manage the model once it's in place? Because it feels to me like you know, people focus on service management maybe because that's what they know. But at the SIAM conference earlier this year in the UK, where you were a speaker, Michelle, there was a session from a technology solicitor, which was really, really well attended because people were thinking, actually, this is something we need for our SIAM models as well. So do you think maybe there is a need for more elements of the business to become involved in SIAM?
Yeah, I mean, unquestionably. I mean, some of the things that I highlighted before are there. I mean, going back to your point, is service management still there at the top of the list because we've got service management people there? Absolutely. And I think this is another challenge we'll probably come on to. A lot of people that moved into service integration models to be the workhorses within them are predominantly service management people. So
Yeah.
whilst they have those service management skills, there's not necessarily the recognition of some of the other things that we've alluded to there, which is challenging, really challenging, I'm sure, for the people that are involved in the role that now are faced with this situation where there's an expectation they're going to do all these kinds of things, and predominantly their background has been service management, process management, those kinds of things. So I think it's really important, as you say, to think about those other things like the management of contracts, the commercial capabilities that you need, and so on.
So I think if we maybe link that to the data that was in the survey about challenges, because I think organisational change management was probably the biggest challenge, but there were some surprises in there as well. What did you feel about the challenges that people said they were experiencing?
That particular point really interested me, and again, I think it pointed us back to being a service management centered kind of response on that. In my experience, the service management side of it is not the simplest, but is actually the one that's most known. It's the most constant, if you like. You're going to roll out processes that have probably been developed. You're going to probably evolve something onto a tool that most people have probably had some experience of. That part's the okay bit. The most challenging bit that I've experienced is effectively the negotiation, renegotiation with suppliers in the commercial side. Now, I'll say commercial side deliberately rather than operational side, because then operationally people really want to make things work, and in a lot of instances the legacy commercial agreements become a constraint to enabling people to do the job they want to do. I refer to people as like armchair contract managers, where everybody suddenly becomes an expert in the contract when it's something they don't particularly want to do.
Clause 4. Clause 4.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But I think the elevation, as Michelle was alluding to, the elevation of the service management being part of a broader framework that encompasses enterprise architecture, work prioritization, security, the systems integration, etc., and having a holistic view, is that having a holistic view of the overall model and then understanding the skills that are required to be able to orchestrate the holistic view. That. I guess I'm getting kind of confused with a number of the different points in here, but I think that's partly because so many of them kind of join together with that frustration around service management.
Yeah, and I think maybe, because I was surprised that things like contract negotiation were ranking less highly on the list of challenges, because it feels to me that if you get the contract negotiation right, so many of the things that follow will be much easier.
It's yes. The problem is that when you're building an environment, you have to have the bravery, if you like, and also backing from the rest of your organisation to hit that head on. It's very unlikely that your outsourcing contracts will all align in perfect symmetry that allows you to agree and renegotiate every single one in the time frame at SIAM. So you'll probably end up maybe targeting one champion supplier that will be willing to do it, and you might have a lot of the others that are still on legacy agreements. hence the kind of the operational versus the commercial kind of challenge that are associated.
Yeah, and I
Agree
think
completely.
I think linking these points about the challenges and the skills that are needed, one thing that then becomes very interesting is the fact that there appears to be a move towards internal service integrators. So using resources from within the customer organization rather than bringing in a specialist organization to do it. Do you think there's maybe a sort of a contradiction there between saying, well, actually, we don't maybe have the skills to do this, but we're going to have a go anyway? What's driving this move towards the internal service integrator?
I would very much like almost do like a sub-level kind of survey on the people that responded about the internal, because understanding that, the follow-up, because the history behind it would be the tell. If they were starting out as an internal, or whether they'd actually tried external and then moved to internal. I think if you do it from if they previously had an external supplier and then moved to internal, then that to me flags a number of potential issues that they've hit. One, it could be that the supplier wasn't as knowledgeable as perhaps they'd marketed. The supplier had actually put in a service management centralized solution rather than a SIAM solution. Again, we've experienced that before. But also the customer isn't necessarily as mature enough to allow the SIAM provider to be the partner that they need to be.
Yeah.
So they're the kind of the drivers that would push somebody maybe to become have that internally. I've seen it that they become internal, but what they do is they take staff from the provider and bring them in, which again is one way of doing it, if you like.
Yeah.
If I can as well, Claire, I think the other thing that needs to be spoken about is that I think fundamentally it comes from a transparency and a trust point of view. An internalization of a strategic capability or a retained organization is absolutely paramount in a successful SIAM capability. A linkage back to strategy and a drive and a continuous improvement focus to that strategy needs to be controlled by a retained organization. The size of that retained organization is the piece that we generally come across as being the flexible part. And I think for me, fundamentally, organizational change is probably the single biggest element of success for a SIAM model to be implemented internally within an operating environment. And I say that because a lot of the terms, a lot of the expectations, and a lot of the new ways of thinking, things like experience level measures as opposed to the traditional service level measures. This is moving the IT service management folk out of that comfort space that they've known. So when you talk about organizational change, there's a whole fear, there's a whole uncertainty, and there's a whole doubt that comes with this change. And that's where, if an organization is looking to retain the capability, then seeking help and coaching and guidance to help that retained organization be successful is probably the biggest thing that needs to be done. Because every day, and this is probably something from experience that's talking, every day those new SIAM leaders are going to be knocked down, because it's not going to be like it was. The supply community that they're going to be challenging is not responding the way it was because of the way or the complex way contracts are worded, or the opportunity hasn't been there to reinvigorate those contracts. So every day they're going to be at a struggle that they're not well equipped for unless the organizational change prepared them. And they need to have that confidence, and they need to have that moment where they can stand up and say, this is why we're important. This is what we're doing it for. And it just so happens that it's important for the whole business, because our information, our knowledge, and our language is centered around a customer. It's centered around an employee. It's centered around an experience that's really, really important. And I think if you can get that level of clarity and alignment, I think that helps build your organizational change piece so much more successfully and accelerates you across that service integration and management journey. This is my view, my thoughts from experience, mostly.
Yeah, and if you want to learn a little bit more about the experience level agreements that Adam's just mentioned, we did actually cover them in an ITSM crowd. I think it was 2 ITSM crowds ago. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that, it is a fascinating concept. So I would recommend you spend 30 minutes catching up on that. I just want to, we're kind of almost out of time, but Michelle, I just want to come to you with one last question, which is close to both of our hearts. Given what we've just been discussing about levels of skills, about the challenges that people face, the support that they need, when there was a question in the survey about how much organisations were investing in SIAM training, the answer was actually not very much. What did you think about that?
Well, it was an interesting one, wasn't it? Because the question was asked at three levels. So it was talking about organisations who were thinking about SIAM, organisations who had implemented, and organisations that are using consulting organisations to help them. And right across the piece, the same thing was there in terms of the amount of people who had actually undertaken accredited training was relatively low.
Yep.
Now that's disconcerting when you certainly when you're working in an environment and you recognise that so many people, first and foremost, don't really truly understand what SIAM is. And the constant feedback I get when I deliver SIAM training courses, my goodness me, I wish my customer would come on this course. And that's the constant thing, because I think there's this lack of understanding still today about the significant roles of each of the layers within the SIAM model. And I'm not saying that accredited training is the be all and end all, but I think what it provides you with is its terminology, its structure, its consistency. And there's this overall sort of presentation of a view of the key responsibilities for each one of those layers, because my experience tells me that when we look at those layers actively within an organisation that you're working with, people still don't really understand, what's it my bit to do? What does the integrator do? What am I supposed to do as the customer organisation? And there's such a heavy dependency from a success point of view, from the customer knowing exactly what their responsibilities are in terms of empowering the integrator. Then when that is not there, we're destined for failure. So I've heard the term before about, a toothless barking dog. And sometimes it can feel like that as an integrator, because if you're not empowered and there's not a communication in terms of the roles and responsibilities and the demarcation lines, that's really challenging. So I think accredited training is helpful, useful. Any training, frankly, would be helpful and useful. It would certainly combat some of the challenges that we've seen within some of the stuff that's come out of the white paper, the survey.
Yeah, I mean, the levels of training were slightly higher in the organisations who were selling SIAM services, which makes sense. But definitely, I think, any kind of training, whether it's in-house, informal, accredited, would maybe help get over some of these challenges we've discussed. So we've come to the end of our time now, which was a real whistle-stop tour of the survey. So here it is again. And there's the website where you can download a free copy. And I definitely would recommend you grab yourself a copy of that. Our next ITSM crowd, our final one of the year, is going to be on the 19th of December at 4 o'clock GMT. And we've got a mixed panel. We've got Rachel McElroy from Solutionize Global. We've got Paul Drayton from Atos. We've got Chris Williams from Durham University. And we've got Kat Turner from ITSM Zone. And basically, we're just going to look at the high points and low points of 2019 from an ITSM perspective and have a little look forward to 2020 as well. But we will be doing a 2020 What to Watch Out For session in January as well. But hopefully you can join us in December for that session. Huge thank you to our panel today. Thank you to Steve. Thank you to Adam. And thank you to Michelle. And I will see you on the next episode of the ITSM crowd. Bye, everyone.
Bye all.
Thank you.